Hi, the official start of the From the Ashes era is upon us, and this is my review of the first issue of X-Men. We have two main plots here. The X-Men, led by Cyclops, had set up shop in Murrow, Alaska, in the former Stark Sentinel factory that was destroyed by the Avengers in Avengers issue 12 and 13. The town sheriff was invited to visit and was shown around the place by Beast, while Cyclops led a field team out to rescue a captured Wolverine, and as well as like six new mutants that Cerebro has detected. From a marketing perspective, a number one issues needs to be easy for new readers as a clean jumping on point. I have heard or seen enough variation of like how do I start reading or where can I start reading X-Men to understand that need. However, as a clean jumping on point, this issue is somewhat unsuccessful, and here's why. There were a lot of references to events in the past. And being a fan of the Age of Krakoa, I am actually glad that the Krakoa wasn't like swept under the carpet and forgotten. However, the constant references to past events, including way back before the Age of Krakoa, such as the drug kick, John Sublime, and the U-Man, we now know whose run MacKay's really loves. All this meant that there were a lot of exposition, and some of which did not really help new readers understand where exactly the characters are at this moment. The wordiness of this issue harkens back to Claremont's days, as opposed to the more modern style of comics. Hi, future Tyler here. You should not be that surprised anymore. What my past self is trying to say is that some of the exposition in this issue seems geared towards getting new readers up to speed, introducing characters, powers, relationships, and conflicts. I also think that MacKay is trying to satisfy long-time X-readers with some of these references, and as a result, it is neither here nor there. I agree. I mean, I understand that there is a lot of baggage with some X characters, and as a long time X reader, I don't really need a lot of explanation. I sometimes some kind of continuity, even if it is just a visual continuity, is sufficient for me. But and on that note, it seems like Magic has lost her gold armor, and she's back in her black armor now. Yeah, seems so. Magneto, though, did choose his red costume, so that is a good visual continuity. True. And Juggernaut, being the teacher's pet and his friendly competition with Magic, is somewhat in line with his recent characterization in Legion of X, which is a good kind of continuity. Yeah, I'm kind of digging the back and forth between those two. And Glob, we need chickens for Glob in his garden. And also Beast being a little bitter about how he missed out on Krakoa might become a problem in the future is I mean his feelings is completely understandable. A note about the visual of Beast here, like the dark shadows around his eyes. I can't help but think that someone played a prank on him and used a thick marker and drew the outline around his eyes, and no one like told him about it. True. Beast is actually a good example of the right balancing act. long-time readers will immediately know what he meant by missing out on Krakoa, and new readers will have just enough information of what will affect him in the future without delving too much into the past. Beast also mentioned that the X-Men are pursuing other projects in the factory. Oh, I completely missed that part when I first read it. Temper, well, on to Temper and Q's interaction. They felt a little bit off to me. I knew they were a couple way back in Wolverine and the X-Men, but Temper was there at the end of the Sabretooth War, and she knew about Q and Phoebe Cuckoo. True, but from Temper's perspective, it definitely has some merits. But I agree that this is an example where there was too much information and yet not enough. On these two characters, they were in a completely different place when we last saw them. Temper's presence here was hand waved away, that she's she's not going to let the X-Men feel anyone again, which is why she's no longer with the Exiles on the Maroon in space. But Q, he died at the end of the Sabretooth War, when the Five was stuck in the White Hot Room and had wiped himself from cerebral craters. There is a plausible explanation, but for now, it's unanswered questions. Right. If Temper and Q's characterization felt off, kind of off, Mac's characterization struck me as very, very off here. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I mean, it is not just the arrogance towards the police chief Robbins, but it's also the way that he was sitting on a floating throne, looking down at Beast and Chief Robbins, and the whole speech about him honing the X-Men through fear of him. That part felt especially off. Yeah, I mean, I went back and reread some of Max's last appearances in Resurrection of Magneto and in Uncanny X-Men 700. There was a through line there, but that broke in this version of Max. The Max here feels pretty much like mutants are superior and therefore deserves to thrive, whereas at the end of Krakoa, he was more like humans and mutants need to thrive together. Like saving one life is saving the world. As much as Xavier was an ass when he told Max to admit that Xavier was right, he was not wrong. By the way, the Marauders, the ship that is the same ship that Kate and the Marauders were using, and there is at the end towards the end, there was a nice setup of Wolverine in his own book. I was a little bit afraid that his appearance here meant that Wolverine will be everywhere, every book, all at once. But I'm glad that's not the case. I agree. I mean, I like that the X books are still coordinated. You were talking about some callbacks earlier to Morrison's and Claremont's run. There's a panel where Wolverine was nailed to an X, and the coloring in that panel is a great callback to one of Silvestri's covers during the Australian era, Uncanny X-Men 251. And talking about colors, there is also a great panel where Q, Scott, and Temple are in the shadows, and the only colors are on their uniform. Pink for Q, yellow and ruby for Cyclops, and orange and blue for Temper, which I thought was especially striking. Kudos to Gracia's color work. Something that is also missing here are data pages. I kind of missed them. And it appears that we are doing bonus pages now through the QR code at the end of the book. And that bonus page gave us a closer look at the new enemy, tentatively called 3K. Not tentative though. And all of them are in shadows, and one of them is actually wearing Professor X cerebral helmet that he was wearing all the time during on Krakoa. There is one that is called the Doctor, not who, has a companion with her, and also I think there's a deliberate X on the table, which seems to suggest that maybe these are mutants. Yeah, it is also odd that we have both a title page and a title panel. Brevoort Vogt is still simply an editor here and not the conductor of X. Art-wise, it took a second to get used to Stegman's art, which reminds me a lot of Art Adams' art. At times cartoony, at times having the characters looking super young, but overall I like it. There are some really wonderful panels. There's one with Psylocke in the dark, just her butterfly emblem, for example. And then there's one where Magic was potting and her foot was in the foreground while she sliced off an arm in the background. Let's also not forget that last page where there's this frozen damaged sentinel looming over the town. I thought that was especially effective. Overall, I feel like the book suffered from an identity crisis in trying to satisfy both new readers and long-time readers, like readers who wants a clean start and a good jumping on point, and readers who likes that the history of characters to not be forgotten. The book ended up not doing either thing well. So it's a little bit messy in that sense. I agree. It struck me that perhaps, or where the book succeeded, is not where I wanted to see with the X-Men. The X-Men is backed in familiar grounds, rescuing other mutants and possibly being feared and hated. It felt like a step back instead of going forward. That is true actually. Well, I mean, that said, I would say that this is kind of like 2.5 out of 5. Unfortunately, it is not a strong showing right out of the gate. But, we can always hope that it will improve, right? Right. And that's it. Like, subscribe, and comment if you liked this and would like to see more X content in the future. Tyler out.